Heart monitor alarms shrieked through the pristine white lab as the human's eyes snapped open, pupils dilating with primal rage. Chief Scientist Corvus and his Voxari archaeology team had just revived the 10,000-year-old human soldier from cryostasis, and would soon wish they hadn't. The retrieval of the ancient time capsule from Earth had been the archaeological find of the millennium. Inside lay Robert Williams, a human male perfectly preserved in cryogenic slumber since the Earth year 2022 AD. The Voxari scientists buzzed with excitement, antennae twitching, compound eyes gleaming. If they could successfully resuscitate him, the wealth of historical and biological knowledge would be unprecedented. But the historical records gave Corvus pause. Humans of that barbaric era were renowned for their aggression and violence, their societies constantly at war. Reviving a trained killer from that bloody time could have disastrous repercussions. The risks had to be carefully weighed against the tantalizing scientific rewards. If the human proved hostile and the Voxari security failed to contain him, galactic peace itself could be in jeopardy. It was a gamble Corvus wasn't sure they should take. The machine hissed as the stasis pod cracked open, frigid fog billowing out. A team of Voxari doctors and security personnel tensely gripped their equipment, multiple limbs poised to act. As the human stirred, his muscular form taking gasping breaths, Corvus knew there was no going back now. They were about to find out if resurrecting ancient humans was a miraculous breakthrough or a catastrophic mistake that would destroy everything they held dear. The blaring alarms and flashing lights gradually faded as a swarm of Voxari security personnel flooded the lab. Robert thrashed against his restraints, eyes wild with fury and confusion, until a sedative hissed into his bloodstream from the IV line. His struggles weakened and his eyelids grew heavy as the drug pulled him back into unconsciousness. Corvus's antennae drooped with exhaustion, and his exoskeleton felt leaden as he watched the human's limp form being wheeled out of the lab under heavy guard. The weight of the disastrous first contact hung over the science team like a suffocating fog. Corvus knew he needed to act quickly to contain the fallout. He hastily assembled a report and requested an emergency meeting with the Voxari High Council. As the council members flickered into view on the holographic display, Corvus took a deep breath to steady his nerves. "Esteemed council members," Corvus began, his voice trembling slightly, "I'm afraid I come bearing grave news regarding the human revival project." He launched into a detailed account of Robert's violent awakening, stressing the barely averted catastrophe and the human's terrifying physical capabilities. Corvus passionately argued that the initiative carried unacceptable risks that far outweighed any potential benefits. To his dismay, the council seemed more intrigued than alarmed. "This human represents an unprecedented opportunity," one council member said, her faceted eyes gleaming. "Imagine the knowledge we could glean from studying a living specimen from such a pivotal era in Earth's history." "The security concerns are not insurmountable," another added dismissively. "We have the finest containment facilities and personnel at our disposal." Corvus's antennae twitched with frustration. "But the danger!" The head counselor silenced him with a raised appendage. "We have made our decision, Chief Scientist. You will proceed with the research as planned, under whatever security protocols you deem necessary. We expect regular progress reports. Meeting adjourned." As the holograms winked out, Corvus's shoulders slumped in defeat. With a heavy heart, he began making arrangements to transport Robert to the secure research facility on the Voxari homeworld. Robert awoke to find himself in a perfect facsimile of a 21st-century Earth hospital room, right down to the faux wood floors and generic landscape prints on the walls. If not for the alien medical equipment and his vivid memories of the lab, he might have believed he'd somehow ended up back home. As his vision cleared, he noticed the mantis-like alien from the lab, Corvus, he recalled, standing at the foot of his bed. Robert tensed, but the restraints were gone and Corvus made no threatening moves. "Mr. Williams, please remain calm," Corvus said, his voice a reedy buzz. "You are safe now. What you experienced earlier was a regrettable misunderstanding. I apologize for any distress we caused you. Robert eyed him warily. Where the hell am I? What's going on? Over the next several hours, Corvus slowly and patiently laid out the situation to the confused and distrustful human. He explained the Voxari, the discovery of the time capsule, and the 10,000-year gap that separated Robert from everything he once knew. At first, Robert responded with disbelief and hostility, convinced it was all some kind of elaborate ruse or fever dream. But as Corvus shared more details about the current state of the galaxy and patiently fielded his questions, a numb acceptance settled over him. In the days that followed, Corvus and Robert fell into a routine of long conversations, interspersed with medical tests and evaluations. Corvus was careful to keep their talks focused on safe topics like Voxari culture and the wonders of the modern galaxy. But inevitably the discussions would turn to Robert's past and the world he left behind. In halting tones he painted a picture of an Earth tearing itself apart, nations dissolving into chaos as society crumbled. He spoke of his own role as a soldier, fighting to protect the dwindling pockets of survivors as the global war consumed everything in its path. "We thought the time capsule was our last hope," Robert said hollowly. "A way to preserve something of who we were in case it was all lost. I never imagined—" He trailed off, lost in painful memories. Corvus listened intently, his scientific mind whirring with the implications. The human's recollections were a priceless window into Earth's turbulent history, and his military training could provide unparalleled insights into the dynamics of human conflict. But even as he marveled at the opportunity Robert represented, Corvus couldn't shake his deep unease. The human was a living weapon, forged in the crucible of a war that nearly eradicated his own species. There was no telling what he might be capable of if he felt threatened or cornered. As Corvus watched Robert's haunted eyes staring blankly at the simulated landscape outside his window, he wondered if the High Council had made a terrible mistake. Only time would tell if the Voxari's thirst for knowledge would be their salvation, or their undoing. As the days turned into weeks, Corvus found himself spending more and more time with Robert, their conversations delving into increasingly complex topics. At first, the human's questions seemed innocuous enough, driven by a natural curiosity about the world he found himself in. But as Robert probed deeper into Voxari technology and societal structure, Corvus couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. He initially brushed off his own suspicions, chalking it up to the natural wariness that came with dealing with such an unpredictable specimen. However, his concerns grew when he discovered discrepancies in the reports from Robert's handlers. Small inconsistencies in their accounts of his behavior and requests hinted at a troubling pattern. Corvus dug further, his compound eyes widening in disbelief as he uncovered evidence that Robert had been manipulating his caregivers. The human had carefully exploited their empathy and trust, using his charisma and intelligence to extract information far beyond the scope of their historical research. Corvus stormed into Robert's quarters, his exoskeleton bristling with agitation. The human looked up calmly from the Voxari history tome he had been studying, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I know what you've been doing," Corvus said, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. "Manipulating my staff, accessing restricted data. What are you planning, Robert?" The human leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. "I'm planning what any survivor would, Corvus, to rebuild, to ensure the future of my species." Robert stood, his tall frame looming over the scientist. "Your people have the technology and knowledge to help me reshape the galaxy. Imagine what we could accomplish together. Human ingenuity and adaptability combined with Voxari advancement. We could create something extraordinary." Corvus felt a chill run through his hemolymph. "You speak of dominance, of subjugating other races. That is not our way." "But it could be," Robert pressed, his eyes gleaming with a fervor that bordered on madness. "You're a scientist, Corvus. You should understand the thrill of discovery, of pushing boundaries. With our combined strengths, there would be no limits to what we could achieve." Corvus wavered, his mind reeling with the possibilities Robert laid before him. The human's vision was seductive, a tantalizing glimpse of a future where their species stood at the pinnacle of galactic power. But even as he felt himself drawn to Robert's words, a cold realization settled in the pit of his stomach. The pieces of the human's past that he had carefully assembled suddenly took on a sinister shape. "The war," Corvus whispered, his antennae quivering. "The one that destroyed your world. It wasn't just a conflict between nations, was it?" Robert's smile turned predatory. "No, it was a culling, a necessary purge of the weak and unworthy, and I was at the forefront of it all." Corvus recoiled in horror as the full extent of Robert's involvement in Earth's downfall became clear. The human had not been a mere soldier, but a key architect in a genocidal plot that had nearly eradicated his own species. And now, with the Voxari's unwitting help, he stood poised to unleash that same destruction on a galactic scale. Corvus's mind raced as he grappled with the enormity of the situation. He had to find a way to stop Robert, to prevent the human from twisting the Voxari's advancements into tools of conquest and slaughter. But as he met the human's cold, calculating gaze, Corvus knew he was facing an adversary unlike any the Voxari had encountered before. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and Corvus feared that his people's thirst for knowledge may have already sealed their doom. Corvus's heart raced as he hurried through the pristine corridors of the Voxari High Council's chambers, his mind reeling from the revelations about Robert's true nature. He burst into the council room, his exoskeleton heaving with exertion. "Esteemed council members, I bring urgent news," Corvus began, his voice trembling. "The human, Robert Williams, poses a grave threat to our society. He has been manipulating us from the start, gathering resources and support for a takeover of our world." The council members exchanged skeptical glances, their antennae twitching. "Corvus, we appreciate your concern," the head councillor said, "but the human has shown no signs of aggression since the initial incident. In fact, his knowledge and unique perspective have already yielded valuable insights for our researchers." Corvus's mandibles clicked in frustration. "But don't you see, that's all part of his plan. He's using our own curiosity against us, exploiting our desire for knowledge to further his own agenda." The councillors murmured among themselves, unconvinced. "We will take your concerns under advisement, Corvus," the head councillor said, "but for now the research will continue as planned. The potential benefits are too great to ignore." Defeated, Corvus left the council chambers, his mind racing. If the council wouldn't act, he would have to take matters into his own hands. Over the next few days, Corvus began to secretly investigate Robert's activities within the research facility. He pored over security logs, tracking the human's movements and communications. What he discovered sent a chill through his exoskeleton. Robert had been in contact with a network of Voxari researchers and officials, sharing tantalizing glimpses of human history and culture. He had carefully cultivated a loyal following, playing on their fascination with Earth's past to gain their trust and support. But that was only the beginning. As Corvus dug deeper, he uncovered a shocking truth. Robert had been using Voxari cloning technology to create a secret army of genetically enhanced human soldiers. These clones, hidden away in a remote facility, were being trained and equipped with advanced weaponry, preparing for a coup that would topple the Voxari government and establish human dominance over the galaxy. Corvus knew he had to act fast. He reached out to his estranged brother, Zaxus, a high-ranking military officer with access to classified information. Together, they began to gather a small group of trusted colleagues, each carefully vetted to ensure their loyalty. As they met in secret, Corvus laid out the evidence he had collected. "Robert is not just a threat to our society," he said grimly. "He's a threat to the entire galaxy. We must find a way to stop him before it's too late." Zaxus nodded, his compound eyes glinting with determination. "I have contacts within the military who may be able to help, but we must tread carefully. If Robert catches wind of our plans, he will not hesitate to strike first." Corvus felt a weight settle on his shoulders as he realized the magnitude of the task before them. They were no longer just scientists and soldiers. They were the last line of defense against a human-led apocalypse. As they began to formulate a plan, Corvus couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Robert's influence was spreading like a virus, infecting the very fabric of Voxari society. If they failed, the consequences would be unthinkable. But Corvus was determined to see this through no matter the cost. He had brought this threat into their world, and he would do whatever it took to eliminate it. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and failure was not an option. Corvus's heart pounded as he and his small band of allies crept through the darkened corridors of the secret facility. The sterile white walls and gleaming metal surfaces were a stark contrast to the sinister purpose of this place, the breeding ground for Robert's clone army. They moved swiftly and silently, guided by the schematics Zaxxas had obtained through his military contacts. Time was of the essence. Every moment they delayed brought Robert one step closer to unleashing his forces upon the unsuspecting Voxari. As they approached the central cloning chamber, Corvus signaled for his team to take up positions. With a series of well-placed charges, they blasted through the reinforced doors, storming into the room with weapons drawn. The scene that greeted them was straight out of a nightmare. Row upon row of cloning pods stretched out before them, each one containing a human soldier in various stages of development. The air was thick with the acrid smell of chemicals and the hum of machinery. "Plant the charges," Corvus ordered, his voice cutting through the eerie stillness. "We need to destroy as much of this equipment as possible." His team moved quickly, attaching explosives to the cloning pods and control panels. But even as they worked, a chilling realization dawned on Corvus. The pods they were destroying were empty. The clone soldiers were already gone. A deep, mocking laugh echoed through the chamber. Corvus spun around to see Robert standing at the far end of the room, flanked by a group of heavily armed human soldiers. "You're too late, Corvus," Robert sneered. "My army is already on the move. As we speak, they are descending upon your precious homeworld, ready to burn it to the ground." Corvus felt a surge of rage and desperation. He lunged forward, but Robert's soldiers opened fire, forcing him to take cover behind a damaged cloning pod. "Fall back!" Zaxxas shouted, laying down suppressing fire as the team retreated towards the exit. Corvus's mind raced as they fled through the winding corridors, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them. They had to warn the Voxari government, to mobilize a defense against Robert's impending attack. But even as they burst out into the open air, the sky above the Voxari capital was already alight with the glow of explosions and weapons fire. Sleek black ships bearing the mark of Robert's clone army streaked overhead, raining destruction upon the city below. Corvus watched in horror as buildings crumbled and fires raged out of control. The streets were filled with the screams of the wounded and the dying as Voxari civilians fled in panic before the ruthless onslaught. "We have to get to the command center," Corvus said grimly. "We need to coordinate a counterattack." As they raced through the chaotic streets, Corvus couldn't shake the sickening feeling that this was all his fault. His blind pursuit of knowledge had unleashed this monster upon his people. At the command center they found a scene of barely controlled chaos. Voxari military leaders shouted orders and pored over tactical displays, struggling to mount a defense against an enemy they had never anticipated. Corvus and Zaxxas stepped forward, their knowledge of Robert's tactics and capabilities making them invaluable assets. They worked tirelessly to coordinate the Voxari forces, directing strikes against key enemy positions and shoring up defenses around critical infrastructure. Slowly, painfully, they began to turn the tide. The Voxari fighters, though caught off guard, fought with a fierce determination, rallying around Corvus and his team. But the cost was staggering. The streets were littered with the broken bodies of Voxari soldiers and civilians, the once gleaming city reduced to rubble and ash. As the battle raged on, Corvus found himself face to face with Robert once more. The human stood amidst the wreckage, his eyes blazing with a fanatic light. "You think you've won," Robert snarled. You think you can stop the inevitable march of human progress? Corvus shook his head sadly. This isn't progress, Robert, this is madness. Can't you see the destruction you've caused? The lives you've ruined? Robert laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. Destruction is necessary for rebirth. The weak must be culled to make way for the strong. That is the way of the universe. Corvus felt a deep weariness settle over him. He saw now that there was no reasoning with Robert, no appeal to logic or empathy that could sway him from his twisted path. With a heavy heart, Corvus raised his weapon. I'm sorry, Robert, I'm sorry for the pain you've endured, for the horrors that shaped you, but I cannot allow you to inflict that pain upon others any longer. Robert's eyes widened in surprise as Corvus fired, the laser blast striking him squarely in the chest. He crumpled to the ground, his life ebbing away in a pool of crimson. As the battle wound down and the last of Robert's forces were neutralized, Corvus stood amidst the ruins of his city, the weight of his actions pressing down upon him like a physical force. Around him, the surviving Voxari began the grim task of tending to the wounded and tallying the dead. The scope of the devastation was almost too much to comprehend. Zaxus laid a comforting hand on Corvus's shoulder. You did what you had to do, brother. Without your actions, the consequences would have been far worse. Corvus nodded, but he could find no solace in the words. He knew that he would carry the guilt of this day with him for the rest of his life. As the Voxari began to pick up the pieces, Corvus threw himself into the work of rebuilding. But even as the city slowly recovered, he knew that the scars left by Robert's attack would linger long after the physical damage had been repaired. In the weeks and months that followed, Corvus became a vocal advocate for greater cooperation and understanding between species. He worked tirelessly to promote the idea that diversity and mutual respect were the keys to a stable and prosperous galaxy. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.